Stretching between Japan's Hokkaido Island and Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula lies a long chain of rugged islands known as the Kuril Islands. This 750-mile arc consists of 56 islands, every single one currently under Russian control. Because of this island chain, Russia sits so close to Japan that at one point the distance between the two countries narrows to barely 4 kilometers. In a way, these islands extend Russia right into Japan's neighborhood. But why is Russia in control of this entire chain? The truth is, this control is far from undisputed. Japan claims ownership of 4 islands in the southern Kurils: Shikotan, Kunashiri, Iturup, and Habamai, territories Japan refers to as its northern territories. And because of this unresolved dispute, Japan and Russia never signed a formal peace treaty after World War II, even though Japan was able to normalize ties with the United States, Britain, France, and others just a few years after the war ended. Why does Japan claim these islands? What role did the United States play in hardening this dispute? And why is Russia unwilling to give up even the smallest piece of this territory? We'll break it all down. But before we continue, if you're enjoying deep dive geopolitical stories like this, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss future uploads. The origins of this conflict go back to the mid-19th century. Russia's eastward expansion was nearing its final stages, while Japan had just ended more than 2 centuries of isolation and was establishing diplomatic and commercial relations with the outside world. In 1855, the two nations signed the Treaty of Shimoda, which set their border between the islands of Iturup and Urup. Under this arrangement, the 4 southern islands, Shikotan, Kunashiri, Iturup, and Habamai, were recognized as Japanese territory. As for the much larger Sakhalin Island, both countries agreed to jointly administer it. Meanwhile, Russia was also expanding its influence in East Asia. Through the treaties of Aigun, 1858, and Peking, 1860, Russia acquired nearly 1 million square kilometers of Manchurian territory from the Qing Empire, land China today considers taken under unfair circumstances during its century of humiliation. But joint administration of Sakhalin didn't last long. Tensions between Russian and Japanese settlers quickly escalated. In 1875, the two sides signed the Treaty of St. Petersburg. Under this deal, Japan obtained control of the entire Kuril Island chain, from Kamchatka all the way down to Iturup, while Russia received full control of Sakhalin. The exchange was uneven geographically. The Kurils cover about 15,000 square kilometers, while Sakhalin is nearly 5 times larger. Japan gained more islands. Russia gained more land. This temporary balance didn't last. By the late 1800s, Japan had rapidly modernized and emerged as a rising imperial power. Its next target was the Korean Peninsula, then under the influence of China's Qing dynasty. This rivalry sparked the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894. Japan's modern military shocked the world by decisively defeating China. Under the Treaty of Shimonoseki, China ceded Taiwan, then called Formosa, the Liaodong Peninsula, and other territories to Japan, and recognized Korea's independence. But immediately afterward, Russia, Germany, and France pressured Japan to return the Liaodong Peninsula to China, a moment known as the Triple Intervention. Japan reluctantly agreed, but Russia quickly moved in to establish its own influence in Manchuria, including control over the strategic port of Port Arthur. Russia wanted an ice-free Pacific port all year round, something its main base at Vladivostok could not provide during winter. This expansion alarmed Japan. By 1904, tensions erupted into the Russo-Japanese War, centered around control of Manchuria and Korea. Japan struck first, launching a surprise attack. In a stunning outcome, Japan destroyed much of Russia's fleet and became the first Asian nation in modern history to defeat a major European power. The war ended with the Treaty of Portsmouth in 1905, under which Russia ceded southern Sakhalin to Japan and recognized Japan's dominance in Korea. Fast forward to World War II. Despite clashing interests, the Soviet Union and Japan signed the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact in 1941, allowing both countries to focus on other fronts. Stalin needed to prepare for a likely German invasion from the West, while Japan directed its military south toward Southeast Asia, targeting US, British, and Dutch colonies rich in oil and minerals. But the arrangement was temporary. In early 1945, as Germany's defeat approached, US, British, and Soviet leaders met at the Yalta Conference. The US expected heavy casualties in any invasion of Japan. American estimates went as high as 1 million soldiers. To avoid a prolonged war, President Franklin Roosevelt asked Stalin to enter the fight against Japan. In return, the Soviet Union was promised control of the entire Kuril chain and southern Sakhalin, territories Japan still held at the time. This secret agreement set the stage for today's Kuril dispute. After Germany surrendered in May 1945, the Soviet Union shifted its armies east. On August 9th, just 3 days after the US atomic bombing of Hiroshima, the Soviets launched a massive assault on Japanese forces in Manchuria. The same day, the US dropped a second bomb on Nagasaki. Soviet troops quickly overwhelmed Japan's forces, seized southern Sakhalin, and captured the entire Kuril Island chain, including the 4 islands Japan still claims today. Although the Soviets acted under the broad promises made at Yalta, their military campaign was fully executed with their own forces and planning. Still, the atomic bombings overshadowed the Soviet advance in global perception, giving much of the credit for Japan's surrender to the United States. Before Japan formally surrendered, the Potsdam Declaration, July 1945, laid out the terms for Japan's post-war boundaries. It limited Japan's sovereignty to its main islands, Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, Shikoku, and such minor islands as the Allies determine. But it never clarified which islands those were. The Kurils were not specifically mentioned, leaving room for interpretation and future conflict. A few years later, in 1951, Japan signed the San Francisco Peace Treaty with the United States, Britain, and other allied nations. The treaty required Japan to renounce claims over both the Kuril Islands and southern Sakhalin. But once again, nothing stated who would receive the Kurils, and the Soviet Union didn't even sign the treaty. This ambiguity later allowed Japan to argue that the 4 southern islands were never legally part of the Kuril chain, but instead part of Japan's northern territories. Russia, however, insists that these islands were legitimately acquired through wartime agreements and military victory. In 1956, Japan and the Soviet Union signed the Soviet-Japanese Joint Declaration, restoring diplomatic relations. The Soviets even offered to return the 2 smaller islands, Habamai and Shikotan, once a full peace treaty was signed. Japan might eventually have accepted this compromise, but a new player stepped in: the United States. U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles warned Japan that if it abandoned claims to Iturup and Kunashiri, the U.S. could permanently retain control of Okinawa. Under this pressure, Japan hardened its stance and insisted on all 4 islands. Negotiations collapsed immediately. Throughout the Cold War, the United States had a strategic interest in keeping Japan and the Soviet Union politically distant, and this approach proved effective. By 1960, after Japan signed a security and defense treaty with Washington, Moscow withdrew even its earlier offer to return the 2 smaller islands, shutting down any chance of compromise. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Tokyo attempted a new approach through economic diplomacy, hoping that cooperation might open the door to territorial negotiations. This period saw the 1993 Tokyo Declaration, which formally acknowledged the existence of the territorial dispute, and the 1998 Kawana Summit, where Japan proposed major economic incentives in exchange for concessions. Yet despite these efforts, no meaningful progress was achieved. One major obstacle was Japan's own domestic politics. Any leader proposing a compromise faced heavy backlash from conservative and nationalist factions, and even considering a 2-island deal could damage a prime minister's political standing. Meanwhile, Russia steadily hardened its position, and in 2020, it amended its constitution to prohibit giving up any part of Russian territory, effectively closing the door on returning any of the disputed islands and blocking the possibility of a future compromise. Beyond the historical and diplomatic arguments, the real reason Russia will never give up these islands lies in their overwhelming strategic value. The Kurils are the backbone of Russia's bastion defense strategy, forming a natural shield around the Sea of Okhotsk, one of the most critical zones for Russia's nuclear deterrence. This is where Russia hides its ballistic missile submarines, protected by the rugged island chain and the surrounding waters. The geography acts like a fortress, allowing Russia to maintain a secure second strike capability deep inside the Pacific. The islands host key naval bases, radar stations, airfields, and forward military positions designed to prevent U.S. surveillance aircraft and submarines from tracking Russia's nuclear forces. They also provide Russia with a direct Pacific access route that bypasses Japanese and South Korean waters. Another reason Moscow views the Kurils as non-negotiable. From Russia's perspective, the most dangerous scenario is simple. If Japan ever regained these islands, U.S. military bases, radars, or missile defense systems could be established there. With American capabilities like Aegis Ashore, Patriot batteries, naval missile defense assets, and long-range radar systems already stationed in Japan, Moscow fears the Kurils could become a new forward outpost for U.S. power, placing American eyes and missiles just a few miles from Russia's most sensitive strategic waters. Russian analysts openly warn that U.S. radars on these islands could monitor or pin down Russia's nuclear submarines in the Sea of Okhotsk. For the Kremlin, that's not just a threat, it's an existential red line. Economically, the islands matter just as much. Northern Sakhalin contains major offshore oil and gas fields, and Russia believes the waters around the Kuril chain may hold additional reserves. Beyond hydrocarbons, the region's volcanic geology contains rare earth minerals, including titanium and rhenium, materials critical for aerospace and defense industries. These resources could become even more valuable in the future. The waters surrounding the Kurils are also among the richest fisheries on Earth. Russia earns significant revenue from crab, pollock, salmon, and other species caught in these exclusive economic zones. Losing the islands would mean losing control over an enormous food and economic resource. Political realities add another layer. Inside Japan, right-wing factions fiercely oppose compromising on the islands, and any prime minister suggesting a two-island solution faces immediate domestic backlash. Meanwhile, Russia has moved in the opposite direction, strengthening its hold. And as Moscow deepens its strategic partnership with China, the chances of Russia making concessions to a close U.S. ally like Japan shrink even further. Beijing quietly supports Russia's stance because China doesn't want any precedent of major powers surrendering disputed territory. For all these reasons, nuclear security, military strategy, U.S. missile defense fears, natural resources, fisheries, domestic politics, and tightening Russia-China alignment, the Kuril Islands have become territory Russia simply cannot afford to lose. Today, the island's population is around 20,000, mostly ethnic Russians, after Japanese residents were forcibly expelled in the immediate aftermath of World War II. More recently, tensions escalated again when Japan joined Western sanctions against Russia following the war in Ukraine. Russia suspended peace negotiations and took an even harder stance. Given Japan's deep alignment with the U.S. and Russia's constitutional changes, it may now be nearly impossible for Japan to regain these islands, unless it could defeat Russia militarily, which is highly unlikely. So what do you think? Did Japan make a strategic mistake in 1956 by rejecting the Soviet offer, under American pressure, to at least reclaim two of the islands? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep historical and geopolitical breakdown, make sure to share the video and subscribe for more content like this.